Everybody is talking about creativity these days. It would be difficult to deny that creativity is beneficial in nearly all areas of life. One could even argue that in a world characterized by rapid and radical changes, such as the world that we live in, creativity is an imperative for survival. Being creative is being adaptive. Many of us want to be creative, or more creative. And you would expect that we would know what it is we are pursuing, what we're talking about. Do we know what creativity is? Google it. You will find multiple definitions, different domains, different stages of the creative process, different cultures, and so on and so forth. And decades, if not centuries, of research and popular insights have indeed produced umpteen definitions of creativity. But what if creativity has no definition at all? No definition. Let's begin considering my proposition by looking at three quite widespread and popular definitions of creativity. Problem solving, for instance. It's often a definition of engineers and inventors. It's perhaps the most common definitions. And many techniques, such as SIT, trees, brainstorming, are oriented towards coming up with nifty and efficient solutions to known problems. And I emphasize known problems because what about problem creating? That is coming up with a new and unknown problem to be solved. It may not be efficient. It may not even be functional. But it is creative, and perhaps even more so, precisely because it is counterintuitive. What about defining creativity as something new that didn't exist? It's a general consensus. After all, creativity is about breaking with tradition and focusing on what lies next. However, if we define creativity as something new, then we risk excluding vast bodies of knowledge, know-how, and tradition, as well as old ideas that can be recombined creatively. The treasures of the past can be easily discarded when we focus or we value solely the part that hasn't been done before. So, if everyone's a revolutionary, ironically, there's creativity to be found in conservatism. What about defining creativity as something useful? The usefulness of creativity. Shouldn't creativity contribute to the solemn betterment of mankind? Creative products are expected to be of value, and so are creative processes. But isn't silliness or nonsense that is the so-called useless creativity that does not always enjoy social acceptance the mother of invention? Doesn't it pave the way to some of creativity's pinnacles? It does. Toying with ideas related to useless creative products contains much of the fun, passion, and vitality that lead the way to useful creative products. By the way, you don't have to be a scholar of creativity in order to come across contradictory and dynamic definitions of a given concept. Consider love, for instance. How would you define love? You could define it as longing for the presence of a distant lover, but once that distance is overcome, longing is no more. It may become fiery passion. You could then define it as passion, but once it is satisfied, and until passion re-arises, of course, it may become the simple pleasures of togetherness. Togetherness and pleasure form an adequate definition of love. But we all know how easily the fine line from pleasure to pain can be crossed when two lovers are together. So love is also pain. Simply put, in love, as in creativity, any definition suggests an action that alters it or blocks the access to another perfectly legitimate definition. So, how can creativity be defined? Perhaps we should aspire to accept multiple definitions of creativity as equally valid. These definitions would then take turns according to our needs and the situations at hand. This is an appealing proposition, but it is also problematic. You see, our brain is the site where creativity happens. Brain scans reveal that creative thinking entails an agitated simultaneous activation of neural networks that usually work independently of one another. However, our brain is also the place where we try to make sense of the world. Our brain is wired to seek and find answers and explanations, and when it does, it enters a soothing neurological, it enters a state of soothing neurological homeostasis. It is happy and content, the preferred state. This is why we like to solve riddles. This is why we dislike riddles that can be solved. But this is also why we are so in love with definitions. We need to know what creativity exactly is, what it isn't, and what should be done in order to achieve it. So, the messiness that characterizes creativity contradicts the disciplined knowledge embodied in any well-structured roster of clear definitions craved by our brain. Back to square one. How can creativity be defined? I compared the messiness of creativity to love. But love resembles creativity from another and no less interesting angle. It is no coincidence that the greatest love poems celebrated the mystic mysteriousness of love. Love is something to be experienced, not defined. Isn't creativity to a large extent mystical and mysterious? If it is, and it is, then defining and demystifying creativity turns it into a muse with clipped wings, an ethereal creature that can help to some extent, but cannot really take flight. More specifically, I argue that creativity should be referred to not as a mystery to be solved, or as a riddle to be solved, but as a mystery to be lived. What does that mean, a mystery to be lived? Jonas Salk once held a conference with his friend, the philosopher Gregory Bateson. When both were asked, where is the mind, or should I say the creative state of mind, Salk pointed to his head, and Bateson gestured at the space between Salk and himself. Besides arguing that creativity, or the creative thinking, is a collaborative or cross-pollinating process, Bateson also hinted that there is great power in not providing an accurate and definitive location of creativity that is here and not here. And indeed, eminent creators have referred with caution the need to explain creative processes. Several examples. Steve Jobs said that from his experience, creative people don't really know how they came to synthesize new things. Countless artists were and are comfortable with the mysteriousness of their creative process. I'm thinking of Miles Davis in the past, Tracy Chapman in the present. David Bohm argued that creativity cannot be defined with words, and Einstein famously referred to the beauty of discovery in terms relating to religious infinity. A mystery to be lived. So, am I advocating ignorance? Not knowing what creativity is? Absolutely not. We need to elucidate the mechanisms of creativity and the fruits of creative thinking in order to implement them. We should not fear definitions of creativity. Rather, cherished definitions are the ones we should approach with caution. I asked, in all that relates to creative thinking, do we know what it is we are after? Apparently we do not. So, are we in a state of constant pursuit after creativity's definition? We are. Creativity becomes stagnant the moment we deny its enigmatic nature and elevate a certain definition of creativity above others. And we all have one or several definitions of creativity we especially like. it is precisely this enigmatic nature that generates countless definitions of creativity, all of them insightful and none of them correct. Creativity is alive only when elusive, and we are creatively alive only when we deny or resist our brain's request to provide a definitive definition, which, thankfully, as you might have guessed, does not exist. Thank you very much.